Hi everybody, I'm Jeff Munchen from History Channel's hit TV series, American Ripper. I like to think I know a thing or two about history. I think museums are a great portal into the past. Museums teach us about what once was and what is to come. Every day we are creating and making new histories. Museums are one of our greatest educators. Museums are interesting, exciting, and even entertaining. When you are in Niagara, be sure to check out the great museums.
So welcome to this episode of Museums across the Niagara region as we explore some of the most famous, intriguing museums in the Niagara region and some of the oddities and bizarre histories they have to share. I love Niagara.
I have a question for you. What do you know about Niagara?
It has a really big falls.
I have a question for you. Do you like history?
So let me ask you, is that a rhetorical question?
Niagara, it's more than just the falls. It's rich in history and wine.
Okay, so we were talking about the more obscure places in Niagara. Some of the coolest history is not even in Niagara Falls.
Historical Niagara rocks!
What else do you have to say for yourself?
Good morning, I'm Donald, and I'm all about history.
And I'm all about the base. The base. If you're born, raised, or visit Niagara, you're always from Niagara. One of the greatest places on Earth. We are about to embark on one of the coolest journeys across the Niagara region as we look at some of the coolest, famous museums that house some of the most priceless and rarest artifacts that celebrate Niagara's history.
Welcome to the Lincoln Museum and Cultural Centre. We're located in Beamsville, Ontario. The museum is, the address is 4996 Beam Street, and we have two spaces at the museum. One is a programming space and one is an exhibit space. We are in an interim location, which is the former library in Beamsville, while we're waiting for a new purpose-built museum space to be finished and completed in Jordan, Ontario. That should be completed by the end of the year. The museum is a community history museum, so we have a large collection of artifacts at the museum, predominantly farming implements and artifacts related to the Pennsylvania German Mennonite history in the town. The current exhibit at the museum up until the end of March is called The Wounded, and it's on loan from the Canadian War Museum. It's an incredible exhibition of photographs that profile the identities of soldiers who'd returned from the war in Afghanistan, wounded in various ways, whether that be physically or emotionally. The quilt exhibit on right now, titled The Quilt Maker, is an exhibit of folk art by local artist Donna Bothan. She uses scrap materials to develop her art practice, which is quilts, and we've had a really great response to this exhibit. They're incredibly vibrant and beautiful quilts.
The Niagara Military Museum is located in the Victoria Street Armory here in Niagara Falls, and it's one of 11 armories that was actually built during the period of reform and expansion of the Canadian militia back in 1896, and it went on to 1911, and was a recruitment and training center during the First World War. This particular armory was opened in 1911. Now, today, as I said, it is now a military museum, and that's thanks to the efforts of Jim Doherty and his entire staff of volunteers, and that are making a significant contribution to the history of the military here in Niagara. And the collection is something that you really have to see to really appreciate. And it actually goes all the way back to the War of 1812, where they have artifacts from that period right on through to the present day.
Personally, the only thing I've been in of a military nature is, in fact, Sea Cadets, many eons ago. Okay, but I did study history in university. I have been a collector of militaria, military history, and guns and swords. Bombs if I can find them, type of thing, yeah. So that's kind of my interest. And coming down from Thunder Bay, I was assistant curator at the Thunder Bay Military Museum, which, unlike this one, is affiliated with Department of National Defense. We're simply a standalone private museum, heavily supported in this building by the City of Niagara Falls. The lobbying to get $50,000 to build this building started prior to 1910. In 1910, the Minister of Militia authorized $50,000 to build it, and it opened in November of 1911. Okay? Now you got to realize that what we're standing in is an invasion route from the United States into Canada. And they wanted to have a defensible structure on the frontier facing the United States, because at that time we were the British Empire. Those people on the other side of the river were not our allies. In fact, they'd invaded us in 1812, and there'd been disturbances, Fenian raids. Okay, so that's why this is built. The thing about this building is it's actually upside down. As a normal armory, okay, the parade square wouldn't be on the second floor as it is now. Okay, it'd be on the first floor, sometimes right down at grade level, so you could take vehicles, horses in and out. But this being built differently, it's actually defensible. If you looked at all the ground floor and the basement windows, they're all heavily barred, they're tall and skinny, at least for the first floor, and the basement windows, the bottom edge facing into the building is slanted, so it can be used as a fire step. So if you have a company of men in this building, even armed with machine guns and other small arms, you will not get in if you attack this building. You will need a piece of artillery to blast your way in. Even so, the first floor is eminently defensible room by room. So that's what it is. It's a mini fortress where troops can go to protect themselves after an invasion, say.
So this tiny building in Queenston started off in the 1800s. William Lyon Mackenzie moved in here in 1823, and after he left, it fell into ruins. The Parks Commission bought it in 1936, and with money from his grandson, they were able to restore it. They opened it as a small museum in 1938. After that, it was in a couple different places. It was some residences, and then it opened again as a printing museum in 1990, and this is what you have. So the main highlight that we have here is our oldest printing press in Canada. It's known as the Louis Waugh Press. It's from the 1760s. And that press was the one that printed the Act to End Slavery in 1793. So it's really important to us, and it's a great piece of history to have. So when people come to our museum, they're able to get a hands-on experience. All of the presses here are still in working order, and you actually get to put your hands on the type, set the type, and print off your own souvenirs to take home with you.
When I was very young, I was smitten with the idea of museums. I think it was because I had a grandmother who was very interested in history, and I got the bug. And I used to often walk from our house on Lundy's Lane to Niagara Falls, New York, to visit the museum. And when we had a cottage here at Niagara-on-the-Lake when I was young, I think I spent half of my time in the museum that was here. I think museums are a very highly important part of our lives because they reflect to us where we have been and what we were once like. And we can then kind of romantically perhaps understand the people who lived here.
So we're at the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum that's located in Niagara-on-the-Lake, of course. This museum was started by the Niagara Historical Society, which began in 1895. They opened their museum in 1896. They had collected about 1,000 pieces from the community, even from the United States, that related to various parts of Upper Canadian history, a lot on the War of 1812. And they decided to open up a museum at the courthouse in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which a lot of people see on Queen Street. So they started collecting there, and they were growing so much that they needed to find another location. And they ended up building what is known as Memorial Hall, which is the building that we're in today. And Memorial Hall is called Memorial Hall because it's, funny enough, a memorial to all those who have gone before us, namely the Loyalists who were here in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which was a big focus for the Niagara Historical Society at the very beginning. So the Memorial Hall of the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum is the very first purpose-built museum in Ontario, and it is pretty much the exact same. There are a few alterations that were done on the interior of the museum, but it's the same thing as what you would have seen in the older pictures of the museum. The first curator was Janet Carnahan, or well, she was the first president, and she later became the curator of the Niagara Historical Museum, and was busy collecting. I mean, she tracked down pieces from across Ontario, across Canada. She even tried her hardest to get Brock's coat with the famous bullet hole, but unfortunately it now is at the War Museum, so we don't have it here, but we did get Brock's hat, which is one of our prized possessions. So she was digging and digging and amassed an amazing collection of Upper Canadian pieces. You know, the museum itself and the Historical Society is one of the longest running in the Niagara region, and so we have a lot of great Upper Canadian pieces, a lot of War of 1812 pieces for researchers or genealogists that are coming in to look for Loyalist archives and such. We do have a lot of that on hand, all thanks to Janet Carnahan and the Niagara Historical Society, who started collecting so early.
We are here at the Fort Erie Historical Museum. This is one of the 4 sites managed by Fort Erie Museum and Cultural Services through the town of Fort Erie. There is also the Ridgeway Battlefield Park about the Fenian raids, the Fort Erie Railroad Museum in Central Avenue in Fort Erie, and Mawinja, the Archaeology Gallery at the Peace Bridge site, and that's on Queen Street in Fort Erie. Here at the Historical Museum, we interpret the history of Greater Fort Erie and all of the many topics that happened here, including Erie Beach Park. So the room you're in now is a local history gallery, and it talks about the many different communities that have come together to form Greater Fort Erie.
I really think that as Canadians, Southern Ontarians, we underplay our history. With that border, it's such a contrast. The Americans, I think, tend to overplay their history, and we underplay it. I think it's almost like at one point in their history they broke away from the British and we didn't, and I can say that because I was born in England. But I'll use my hometown as Fort Erie as an example. I think we have as much or more history in Fort Erie, particularly along the lake around the old fort and Erie Beach, than anywhere in North America. But you would never know it by the lack of tourism we get, by the lack of publicity we get, compared to a place, let's say like Niagara on the Lake, I know they have the Shaw Festival and they've got the wineries, but we have as much or more history than Niagara on the Lake, but we don't exploit it. We don't have the tourists come to Fort Erie like Niagara on the Lake does. And I think projects like this are really good. I think we need more of it. I think we need to promote our local history more than we have done.
Okay, for today's trivia question, I'd like to ask you, what pyramids are older, the Egyptian or the Mayans? The answer is the Egyptians, and by 2,000 years.
So the St. Catharines Museum was established in 1967. A lot of museums were established to celebrate Canada's centennial of Confederation, including the City of St. Catharines Museum. And it was originally located in the Meryton Town Hall, which is in Merritt Street, on Merritt Street in Meryton. And in 1991, the museum was moved here to this location, to this purpose-built building, to take advantage of the Lock 3 location where lots of visitors were already coming to visit, and also to showcase the city's history in a much bigger and better way. So the museum features artifacts and exhibits that tell the story of the history of the city of St. Catharines and the Welland Canal in St. Catharines. So you can see exhibits about the development of the 4 Welland Canals, the Underground Railroad, different things about community's history, including fire departments, building the different car industry here in St. Catharines, recreation. Currently we have an exhibit that features the Spanish flu, and we also feature the Ontario Lacrosse Hall of Fame. Then of course, most people know this as Lock 3, so you can see ships traveling through the lock right up close, almost within arm's reach. It feels like you're within arm's reach, and you can watch the ships transit through the canal at the best location to see them up close and personal. Well, it's really important that the city have a museum because it's the thing that tells the story of the city. I always like to say that museums add the flavor to communities. So anybody could be a cookie cutter community, but what's the things that you see in your museum are the things that add all of the depth and flavor and culture, and it speaks to all the stories of all the people that have lived here over the years, and it's really important to be able to tell individual stories rather than just tell, you know, the history of a war or the history of a topic. This museum focuses directly in the people that live here and have built this community over the years.
The museum was established first in 1977. We've been in 3 sites during our history. The first site was on South Pelham Road. The building is no longer there. The second site was on Queen Street in an old school, and that site is no longer there. And we were in our current site, the former Welland Public Library building at 140 King, and we moved over here in 2005-2006. So further to the history of the Welland Historical Museum, we are in a designated Andrew Carnegie Library. We believe that it's probably one of the last that was built. We're very, very fortunate to still have it and have it being used for educational purposes. Some of the original Carnegie libraries have been demolished and no longer exist. So we're very, very pleased about that. The library itself was completed in 1923, and it was designed by a well-known architect here, Norman Kearns, and we actually the museum came into this building in 2005-2006. So welcome to the Welland Museum's Children's Gallery. This is a gallery that is very interactive, it's very hands-on, and it deals with things from the Welland Museum's collection, but it also deals with some live specimens. We have a partnership with London Reptiles, and about every few months they actually bring in live new critters for us to learn about. It's a space where we encourage families to just take some time, sit down,
have a look at the animals, learn about them. Right now we have a bearded dragon, we have a cane toad, and we have the critter that belongs to the Welland Museum, which is a red-eared slider. Her name is Abby. But we also have some cast of some original bones from a mastodon that was found here in the early 1900s, just outside of Wainfleet, Fenwick area. We have some different variations of shells, we have some fossils, we have a python, we have a crocodile, and we encourage folks to come down and learn about them. You can touch them, you can figure out what it means to be a paleontologist, you can do the study, you can do the measuring, and you can get to spend a day in the life of what it's like to dig for bones. So this little display here is just a very small portion of what we have in our military collection. We're very proud of the uniform to my right. It's an actual service uniform from Vimy Ridge. It belonged to a gentleman, Ross Alexander Gordon, who served at Vimy. And when he came home, he actually donated the soldier's uniform, his uniform, to the museum over a period of time. And it's really one of the most important and prized collections that we have. We talk a little bit about his service record. We talk a little bit about the dolls and the women at work during the war, but it has a direct link to our community here in Welland, Ontario. So this is the parlor exhibit. It's a small sampling of some of the larger musical pieces that we have. So the organ, our baby grand piano, and it's also a permanent display here at the museum. It deals mostly with some of the larger pieces that we have, and especially with musical instruments and pianos, they really should always be on view so that you can enjoy them.
When I was a kid growing up in Niagara Falls, I knew of a museum down by the river that had some interesting old things in it, and I was told that there was a mummy in it. So I either walked or rode my bicycle down, walked into the building, and my first impression was, having never been in a museum before, it reminded me of a warehouse. Lots of dust. Nothing was had a name tag on it. Did not know what I was looking at. I saw some taxidermy work there that was not good, but I wasn't there for that. Looked around, and there was a big casket that was open, and I went over to it. Did not know what I was looking at, and here was a mummy. First one I'd ever seen in my life, and I stayed and stared at it for quite a long time, not knowing that I was staring into the face of Ramses I, one of the greatest, most powerful pharaohs in all of Egypt. This thing had to be about 4,000 years old. And I just remember thinking how amazing it was that they could preserve a body for that length of time. That started me on a quest for learning a little bit about Egypt, how pyramids were built, how people were mummified. But further into my research on the mummy, I found out that there was a fellow that came over from England that started the Niagara Falls Museum back in the 1800s, started at the base of the Horseshoe Falls, went over to Niagara Falls, New York, back again to the building that I saw, and eventually that mummy was sold to a museum in Georgia. When it was in Georgia, they discovered through DNA that it was Ramses. Historical, sent back to Egypt where it belongs.
Come to Niagara Falls History Museum and get your hands-on history. I'm Clark Burnett from the City of Niagara Falls Museums. Right now I'm standing in the Gale Family War of 1812 gallery. Behind me is a wonderful backdrop of Niagara Falls, and that's what we do here. We talk about the wonderful history of Niagara Falls. So the War of 1812, we're standing on the battlefield, the Battle of Lundy's Lane here. The Lincoln Militia were positioned right here during the battle itself, and we're on historic property around the main and ferry area. When people come here, they come and visit this gallery, and they can also see the rest of the Niagara Falls story. We tell all the many different stories that are unique to the community and what we do here in the City of Niagara Falls. You'll learn about tourism, you'll learn about hydro generation, you'll learn about the firefighters and the military people that fought here. And then in our temporary gallery, we do lots of different things throughout the year. Next coming up is World War Women, we've done electricity, we've got hockey in the summertime, and lots of other things to let you sort of understand the history of Niagara Falls, the history of the world, and the history of Canada.
The Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center opened to the public in May of 2018. We were built upon decades of research of the Underground Railroad, specifically here in Niagara Falls, New York. We tell the stories of freedom seekers on their journey from the south to the north and at the major crossing points here along the Niagara River and at the falls. It was a major funnel for freedom seekers escaping persecution and enslavement in the south. And they journeyed all the way here on a variety of transportation means, whether that was by boat, foot, hiding by car, by train, and all the way to Niagara Falls to cross here at the suspension bridge and also at the ferry boat crossing here in Niagara Falls. We tell these stories here to also talk a little bit about what's happening in our world today. We connect the past to the present through the lens of the stories of the Underground Railroad. We feature stories of the black waiters who worked at the Cataract House Hotel in the booming tourist industry here in Niagara Falls, and their work on the Underground Railroad. Many of them had been born enslaved in the South and found work and a life here in the North and helped others. Those are the stories that we tell here at the Niagara Falls Underground Railroad Heritage Center.
The museum is significant because unfortunately it is a forgotten piece of the history of Western New York. A lot of residents, including a lot of the children that I give tours to, especially in February during Black History Month, are unaware of the strong abolitionist and anti-slavery sentiment that was here in Western New York, including in Niagara Falls. Now, as far as the history of Niagara Falls, automatically I think about the Cataract House, which Ali talked about previously, about the waiters, including the head waiter, John Morrison, who personally rowed freedom seekers across the Niagara River to freedom in Canada. So oftentimes individuals who were enslavers would bring their servants, whom we refer to as freedom seekers, because slavery was so dehumanizing and it's a way to return agency back to these individuals. They would come up here along with those people who were enslaving them when they visited Niagara Falls. And what would happen behind the scenes at the Cataract House is the waiters, including John Morrison and others, would be able to help them escape to freedom in Canada. And this also adds to the ingenuity of the individuals who were enslaved. There was no cell phone, there was no computer, you couldn't send a text message or anything like that, but they were able to send the information ahead to the waiters to let them know that they were traveling there, and they would put a plan in place in order to help them escape.
This establishment was deeded by Arabella Williams to the city of Port Colborne to become a library in the 50s, but the building was seen as unfit to be a library, so the library was built next door, and in 1975 we had Arabella Williams' home become our museum. The carriage house and Arabella's tea room are also original to the site, and all the other buildings in the Heritage Village have been added or built here since then. We have an Arabella's tea room, which is Edwardian tea room. We have a blacksmith shop. We have a schoolhouse. We have a new timber frame cabin, which will be a weaving shed, as well as the blacksmith shop, which is turning 150 years old this year. So we're standing in the Heritage Resource Center where we store over 19,000 artifacts, and I'm here with the 1901F steam buggy, which is one-off original car built in Humberston, Ontario. We also have an archives facility where you can do research, and a marine park where you'll find a lifeboat from the Hochelaga and the Yvonne Dupree wheelhouse where you can be the captain for the day.
Did you know that Niagara-on-the-Lake once was home to one of the coolest, intriguing museums in all of Canada? The Museum of the Paranormal. It was owned and operated by Daniel Cumulato and Stephanie Dumbrick. Unfortunately, over the years, even though the fascination with the paranormal continues to evolve, grow, and maintain interest, it just did not last in the little old town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Unfortunately, we only have its ghostly and haunted remnants of the past, which include, of course, a tribute to the great famous Harry Houdini.
Is the town town-owned museum in the town of Grimsby. We currently house about 25,000 artifacts and about 13,000 archives. They are all available for research purposes here at the museum. We put on about 4 exhibits yearly, rotating exhibits, so that everybody can get a chance to see what we have in our collection. We also try to bring in some traveling exhibits from some bigger museums as the Canadian Science Centre, as well as the ROM, to try and sort of bring in new ideas for people who might not be able to get to Toronto or to Ottawa to see those types of exhibits. So we bring those in every few years just so people can see what we have, what Canada has to offer. We also work very closely with other museums in the Niagara area. We are part of a movement called MONA, which is the Museums of Niagara Association. If you buy a membership to the Grimsby Museum, you have free access to all the other museums in Niagara, and we have a reciprocal agreement with all of those museums as well. So if you have a membership to any of those museums, you can come to the Grimsby Museum for free and see what our members get as perks with their memberships. So the Grimsby Museum was opened in 1983. It was built after it outgrew its old location, which was the Stone Shop Museum, which is just up on Main Street. The Grimsby Museum was designed and built by the town of Grimsby. The site that it's built on is the old Alexander Building, which was the old town hall here in Grimsby. It was decided that it was going to cost too much to renovate the Alexander Building, so they built a brand new building in 1983. In the early 2000s, the town of Grimsby and the Grimsby Museum raised money in order to put an addition on to the Grimsby Museum, and we built a larger gallery. Upstairs we have 2 galleries. We have our Wolverton Gallery, and we also have our Florence Martin Gallery. The Florence Martin Gallery is named after the first curator of the Grimsby Museum. She was a very long-standing member of the town of Grimsby, and she ran the museum for almost the Stone Shop Museum as well as the Grimsby Museum until she retired.
Well, there you have it, folks. A journey through the Niagara region, a journey through history, exploring some of the most intricate, intriguing, and of course, informative museums across the Niagara region. See you next time on Historical Niagara, where we are bringing history, that is the history of Niagara, to the world.
Thank you.